Welcome back to Inclusion Part 3, Putting It All Together. Again, I will remind you after this section that you will be given a code word, which you will need to complete the Google form, Show What You Know. So let's get started. When in doubt, teach. I know you guys have seen this slide numerous times, but what we have to remember, again, when we're talking about effective instruction, we need to remember not to commit a suicide. All too many times I hear the same story. He's in middle school. She should know what she's doing. We need to stop assuming they know. If they are not doing it and it's not connecting, then that means that they don't know. And we need to teach them that skill. So again, don't commit a suicide. And remember, when in doubt, always teach. The effective instruction model. I do, we do, you do. Again, a slide that you are all familiar with, things that you've heard before that are not different. It is important to remember this effective instruction model. A lot of times we do a lot of I do, where we demonstrate and we model the skill, the steps, and then we go right to you do. Now complete homework, questions 10 through 12 or 10 through 20. All right. We need to really remember it's really important to do I do, we do, you do. And we use this model and use it effectively. Again, I'm teaching a new skill. I need to demonstrate. I need to model. I need to show what I'm looking for and how to complete a certain step. Then we need to have some guided practice, and that's the we do. We want to make sure we're doing this together, and I'm guiding them through the steps and leading them to the correct answer. Once we have done the we do, then they can do the independent practice and test. If I find that during that independent practice or test, they're still not getting the correct answer or they're doing the steps incorrectly, then we need to go back to a we do. And we might be doing the we do frequently. But again, we want to make sure that we're giving our students ample experience to show their work, guide them through the steps to hopefully that they get the correct answer and are able to do the you do independently. But it has to be an I do, we do, you do section. It cannot just be an I do straight to a you do. Without that guided practice, we're going to see lots of errors. So again, we want to make sure that we're doing the effective instruction model. When we're talking about effective instruction, it enhances those response opportunities and promotes engagement. The more engaged students are, the more effective our instruction is going to be. And it gives them more opportunities to feel comfortable to where they can ask questions, self-advocate, show their work, show that they're getting the correct answer. But again, the more students are actively engaged within a lesson or a session, the more effective our instruction will be. We need to make sure it's very explicit and it's appropriate for the individual. Again, if the student has an IEP, what needs do they have? What supports need to be put in place to make sure that we're providing the effective instruction to meet the needs of that student? We also have to make sure that they have the prerequisite skills to master before moving on. All too many times we move very quickly through a unit and students have not mastered those prerequisite skills. So it's very important that we make sure we see prerequisite skills being mastered before we move on. We also can include instructional warnings. All right. In 5 minutes, we're going to be moving on. You have 2 minutes to complete questions 9 and 10, and then we will move on to a new section. Again, telling them what is going to be occurring and when. Again, it takes some of that anxiety out of play so students know exactly how much time they have as well as what's next. Now, if students have anxiety about time, then maybe we need to make sure we rephrase it a different way that we don't use a time transitional warning. We also want to make sure we're giving them lots of opportunities to initiate interactions. Very important. This is where they are working with their peers and that we initiate whether it's interactions between themselves or it's interactions between student teacher. But we want to make sure that they are initiating the interaction and not always waiting for us to do the prompting. right? And we want to provide a variety of formats, one-to-one, small or large group. Again, we want to make sure that our students have a sense of belonging when we're talking about inclusion. We want to make sure that when they're in that classroom, they feel part of that classroom, not just stuck in the back at a table by themselves or with a para or with another student. We want to make sure that they feel that they belong in that class. When we're talking about instructional prompts, errorless learning. There is a huge misconception that students need to make mistakes, that they'll learn from their mistakes. They're not going to learn from their mistakes. They don't need to make mistakes to learn, because all too many times they learn the mistake. They don't learn the correct way. So we want to make sure that we provide multiple opportunities where they're getting the correct answer, the correct feedback. Because the more times they hear it, the more times they see it, the more times they'll get it. Okay? But if they make mistakes, 9 chances out of 10, they're going to learn the mistake and not the correct way to complete an answer. Prompting. I see a lot of times we do a lot of prompting and students become very prompt dependent. We have to be careful. We only prompt when necessary. And depending on the side of how many prompts we're giving them, we have to figure out how we fade our prompts. Remember, you're working your way out of a job with that student. It is time for you to move on now to another student who's going to need your support. Because remember, when they graduate, you aren't going to be there. So always we put supports in place, but then the plan is, how do we fade out those supports? Strategies with effective instruction, teacher questioning. This is typical where a teacher is going to ask a question and waits to get a response, and then they provide the feedback. We want to make sure that we're providing a high frequency. There should be 3 teacher statements to 1 student response. Again, the more times they hear the correct answer, the more times they see the correct answer, is going to provide that effective instruction and give them more opportunity to show correct responses. We also need to make sure we give ample response time. All too many times we're working with students that have very slow processing speeds. Their working memory is poor, and we go very fast. And by the time you have finished the question, they're still trying to process the first part of that question. So we have to make sure we give them ample processing time before we get the response. Choral responding. This is all group responding. So that's where students respond very orally and in unison to a question. So for example, if I'm doing times tables, very simple, where I can say 2 times 2 is 4. And I repeat it, 2 times 2 is 4. I give the class a signal. 2 times 2 is, and I give them the signal. They say 4. What's really nice about choral responding is I can hear when a student gives an incorrect response. So if I'm doing choral responding and somebody says, when I prompt them 2 times 2 and they give me 6, I hear that. So what I do is I say 2 times 2 is 4. And I might call in individual students to repeat it. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. Then I have the whole class say 2 times 2 is 4. So again, I didn't call the student out, but I made sure I corrected it, and they heard it numerous times what the correct response was. Response cards. You can use pre-printed cards with an ABC on them, a true or false. It all depends on what you're using, whiteboards, chalkboards. But they hold it up simultaneously. You can quick look around to see if they have the correct response, and then you move on. You want to make sure that you're using the response cards for very short answers. You don't want anything where they're writing sentences and paragraphs and explanations or essays. Response cards, of course, will not work. They are to be used as a nice review, a nice game, but again, it gets the students actively engaged and allows you to quickly scan to see if they have it. If they don't have it, then you provide the correct statement, and you know you have to come back to that question to make sure that they got it the second time around. All right, you have completed part 3 of inclusion, effective instruction. Your code word for show what you know is flowers. Make sure you remember it's a capital F and it is plural. So flowers is your code word for this section.